7 years ago, I restored this antique trunk. When I first started out, I don't know why, but for some reason I didn't film my steps in the beginning, scraping the old paper out of inside the trunk, or even film video of inside the dome lid, what I did with it. So I have some pictures here, and I have some video of the process I used to restore this trunk, and I hope you enjoy it. Some areas actually need retouched up since I did this project 7 years ago, but I think you'll get the idea. Okay, so the first thing I worked on after removing the old torn ripped paper that lined the trunk was the inside of the dome lid. It was brown, but the paint was chipped, and so I scraped it all off. But I did not go near this decaling that's on the inside of the trunk lid because I wanted to keep that intact. It's very cool and very old and authentic. So I kept that in place and touched it up a bit with some red paint where it had some issues. I wanted to bring some color into the trunk lid to match what I had chosen for the interior, which was an ivory color material. So I put some ivory color paint up in the trunk lid to kind of go with that. These were stencils that I did, and the paint around this decal I did all freehand. So I worked on the inside of the trunk first. There was no hinge at the time, so I was able to lay the lid back on a couple of chairs and work on it. Otherwise, it probably would have been necessary to remove the trunk lid, which they do recommend, but I didn't need to with the hinge missing. I've noticed when I open and close the lid that I'll find little pieces of things laying in the trunk. I think they're flaking off of the decal in the lid, so I'm thinking about spraying a clear coat product over that. For step-by-step instructions on how to do the interior of your trunk, I strongly suggest going to antiquetrunksandchests.com, where he will show you how to do this by gluing fabric onto poster board. And what you do is you leave about 1/4 inch all around each panel, and then you do the corners with separate pieces of poster board. So I used the thicker poster board when I lined the inside of the trunk, and I'm kind of glad I did, and I'll explain why. 2 reasons. One was this area right here, right inside the front of the trunk. It's a couple inches wide. For some reason the wood there was much thicker than it was here, so there was this like space. So I used the thicker poster board like I did everywhere else, but I used the thinner poster board here, and it became one flush surface, so I was kind of glad that I made that decision. And then the other reason I like the thicker poster board was because the nails that came in from the handle out here had to be hammered in, and even though I tried to get them as flat as I could, they still stuck out a bit. But with the thick poster board, that's all well protected in there. This area here, I had to cut out the poster board material a bit to allow for the hinge to have a place to rest. Was a damaged area right in this area here that I fixed. I believe I used a type of filler. I don't know if it was wood filler or what I use now. Like I said, it's been 7 years, but I got it as best as I could, and you'll see a picture here of what it looked like before. And then after getting that all smooth, repainted all the areas that are red. It was looking dull and definitely needed. It's funny, this project, at first when I started out, I was only gonna like replace the broken hardware, maybe do the red paint, and then that was it. But then after I would do each step, everything else would look so bad compared to the new, brighter stuff that I ended up going a lot further than originally planned by, shining up the hardware, even, with some paint, and cleaning up the metal. All the black areas you see are metal, and then cleaning up the wood area too. And you'll see in the video what I used on all of these areas. One handle was missing on this trunk originally when I started to work on it, and I replaced it. I actually replaced both of them so they would match. They're leather, and I'll include in the description where I got those. I replaced the hinge inside the trunk because it was broken. I can't remember if it was broken or if it was missing now. But I found that at Ace Hardware, and I was so, naive about antique trunks at the time that I actually thought it had 2 hinges originally, and I couldn't figure out why they always came in packages of 1 hinge. Well, I come to find out they only had 1 hinge. So you learn as you go. And here's what the trunk looked like without the handle. And after it was repaired. This was the damaged area on the trunk. It's not perfect. I had to add a piece of material because the canvas that was under it was all missing. And it actually keeps the trunk from closing all the way, because I'm afraid if it got closed all the way, we'd never open it again because there's no key. This was another area that was damaged on the trunk, and I filled it as best as I could. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the supplies that I used and you may need for your job. Of course, it's going to depend on what your trunk needs. But, of course, gloves, sandpaper, tack cloth before you do any painting. Get all that loose debris out of there. A scraper. To make it easier on yourself, if you're removing an old paper lining inside a trunk, use some vinegar and water. I didn't get that tip when I started, and I just scraped it all off. I highly recommend getting, this is a product that I saw on Shark Tank, and it really does work. You put your paintbrush in there, and it keeps it moist, no kidding, for weeks. Okay, and my husband happened to have a light that goes on your head, and I highly recommend that for working on the trunk. I wasn't in as well lit of a area as I would have liked. When it comes to doing your interior with the poster board and material, a couple products here. I used spray tacky glue to glue the material to the poster board and to glue the poster boards into the trunk. The fellow in the video with AntiqueTrunksAndChests.com recommended a product called 3M Super 77, I believe. He also recommended this, and I found this at Walmart. It's inexpensive. It's a nice little clear glue. I used that for the little strips, the corner pieces of material on the poster board inside the trunk. Rags, of course. I used linseed oil near the end of the process to clean up the wood and the tin and give it a nice protection and shine. And I used mineral spirits to clean up my hands and things, and if I got paint on areas that I didn't want paint, I used that. I don't have here painter's tape, which is a necessity, but I used it all up. This product is Rub and Buff. I used this to refinish the hardware so nicely, as you can see, and it comes in different colors. I chose antique gold. It's a wonderful product. I'm going to show you how to use that. And the only thing not pictured here would be the material, your fabric for inside the trunk, and the poster board. Okay, I'm about to finish the very last area of the trunk with the rub and buff right here on this area of hardware. It's the last one to get done. And I'll show you how this rub and buff works. I'm really impressed with this stuff. It works very nicely. Zoom in here a little bit. I discovered that you don't need very much at all. Just a little bit at a time. I was putting it on a plate and then applying it from the plate, but it would dry up too fast. It dries very quickly, so just a little bit, and it goes a long way. And I tried with a small brush as well. Whoops, I'll get that off later. But it works best with just your finger. And as you can see, it does a really nice job. Now for the areas like this that has a recessed in area that my finger's not reaching, I will use a small brush to get in there. There, I almost did that entire area with just that little bit I put on my finger. Now I've got a small brush, and I'm going to fill in the areas that I couldn't reach with my finger alone. And again, I'll go over any place that the gold has run onto the metal with my linseed oil, which I guess is the same as flaxseed oil, I found out. I did also want to mention that the Rub and Buff product I found at Michael's, and the one tube was sufficient to do all the hardware on the trunk, and actually I still have some left. Now I have the top and the bottom done. I'm going to take a rag, a different rag from my linseed oil rag, and just kind of lightly rub over what I've done. The paint is dry by now. I'm just sort of rubbing. I don't want to rub too hard because it will rub some off if you do. Okay, now I've just got to remove some places that I went outside my lines. I might add that the areas of this hardware trim that aren't flat, that like go around the sides, I actually used my fingernail in the glove that I had on and would kind of run it around to get that edging, because the brush just wasn't doing as good a job, and it was getting the gold everywhere else. And here's the finished piece of hardware, top and bottom. When I did the handles, I did tape these off with painter's tape around the handle and around the strap. At the time when I added the straps, I wasn't planning on doing this to the hardware, but the hardware just looked old and kind of lost its color and sheen, and when I stumbled upon a YouTube video about Rub and Buff, I thought, I think I'm going to do that. And by then I already had the handles hammered on, so I wasn't about to remove them. So I sort of did things a little backwards at times, but it all came together. I just used the painter's tape. I wanted to show you just a little bit, putting a little bit of the boiled linseed oil onto a rag, and then applying it on the wood really will help protect and seal that wood. Doesn't change the pigment, the color of the wood or anything, but it does make it a richer, it's a richer color than it was before. And the nice thing about the linseed oil, if I got any gold over on the wood when I was doing the rub and buff on the hardware, the linseed oil, rub that on those areas, will get those out. But there it is. It's all finished now. It's been almost 3.5 probably months I've worked on this trunk, so I'm glad it's finally done. I just plan to use it for storage, put some blankets and things in, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm real pleased with how it turned out. The back's kind of boring. There's no hardware. But anyway, it's not perfect. Probably has a couple areas I need to try to remove some red paint that got onto the black and so forth. But all in all, I'm very pleased with how it turned out. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope there's something in it you found informative to help you with your own steamer trunk restoration. And if you're wanting to restore a trunk without having to go completely full restoration, you know, every hardware piece comes off, etc., etc., but you want to do this type of restoration, I hope you'll tell me about it and comment or ask any questions if you have any. Thanks again. Thanks for watching, and I hope that something in this video will possibly help you in your project. Bye.